so much for checking out my podcast. I'm really excited to have you see all the great things we're doing. Before I introduce our guest, who I am really excited about, just want to say please get a chance to subscribe to our YouTube channel and Spotify. That's how the channel grows. I have been incredibly humbled by the responses I've gotten. So far, we've done over 20 podcasts with amazing people. So I really do appreciate your support. If you'd like to be on the podcast, please reach out to me. I will have Julia's contact information, my contact information at the end of the podcast. So when you get to the end, you can see all of our contact information to reach out to us, whether you're trying to get help with Julia or you're trying to reach out to me to be on the podcast. So with that out of the way, I'm here with CEO Julia Skolnick. She is the founder and CEO of Professional Learning Partnerships. She is going to knock your socks off. Super smart, super insightful. And one thing I will say is I was fortunate enough to meet Julia, I guess probably 6 years ago. I don't know if it's exactly 6, but it was a while ago. And we met at the Franklin Institute. Our school was doing a professional development in service. And she was there talking about something that probably none of us knew anything about. we never, it was all about brain science and learning. And this many years later, she has built an incredibly successful business in something that I myself am so passionate about, for many reasons. Most of them because I've been teaching for 36 years. And before Julia and I hopped on, I said to her, all the stuff that she's doing, I find that if everybody did the stuff that she said we would do or should do, learning would be so much better. So with that out of the way, hi, Julia.
Hi, Craig. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
You're going to be great. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background, your business, and basically anything else that you want to share?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really respect you as an educator. We've had so many opportunities to collaborate, and I know your philosophy on education. I just have so much respect for it. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm Julia Skolnick. My background in education started out as an elementary educator. But when I was pre-service, I was also studying psychology and neuroscience and cognitive science in my undergrad at Brandeis University. And so from the very beginning of learning to be a teacher, I saw education from different lenses. I was seeing it from the practical side of what it means to work with students and design lessons. And then I was really intrigued by this other side, which is the science of learning and how we remember and how our brains connect things to be able to hold on to it in the long term, and how do we transfer skills, and how does identity fit into that, and social connections in classrooms. And so I remember in my early days of teaching just having a lot more questions than answers and being super curious. I had opportunities to work outside the classroom. I worked in a memory lab at the University of Pennsylvania. I worked and did some research at Northwestern University in their learning sciences department, and then was at the Franklin Institute for a while. But all of these different experiences I had really put the science of learning and the practice of education side by side. And that became my passion that, gets stronger every day, is thinking about how can we make education better by using what we know about the brain. And so in 2021, I formed Professional Learning Partnerships. We work with school districts primarily in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and we're working together to form innovative ways to use what we know about the brain to enhance learning and culture and leadership through some frameworks that we've developed. But that's today's update about where we are.
I love it. And it's interesting. I'm going to be taking some notes because I think it'll be a good way to frame things. And you talked about something right off the bat. This could be an entire podcast easily. You talked about the transfer of skills into education. And what I will say, and again, if I say something that you think is incorrect, just correct me and tell me. What I find in learning, this is from my own kids that I have, my older kids and kids I teach, is the transfer of learning and skills into real life application is sorely lacking. There's so much data behind what kids, and this is where I think it gets interesting. People would say what kids learn, and I would say what we want them to learn. Because if kids have really learned something, and I'm talking about any level, shouldn't they retain it?
Ooh, that's such a good question, Craig. So, one of the frameworks that we use at PLP for thinking about translating brain science to education is called Safe Stretch Stick. I can't remember if any of our trainings included that with where you are at Centennial, but we talk about that our brains need to feel safe in order to be available for learning. That's a primal mechanism of the brain, is it's all about survival. And if we don't feel safe, our brain knows to deprioritize academic requests upon it. So that safety is first. That enables stretch to be able to take on new skills that we don't have yet and kind of push our comfort zone to be able to acquire new knowledge and skills. But what you're talking about is that stick part. And I think this is a place where traditional education really falls short. Curriculum designers, I would love to expose them more to the science of memory and learning. We've got to talk about, are we designing experiences that are actually going to have a success rate in long-term memory? Or is it just churning in and out test and it's forgotten? The brain is too sophisticated to hold on to useless information. And so that gets to the heart of the disconnect that I think we're seeing in transferability of knowledge and skills. If kids don't see learning to be valuable, they will forget it most likely. So we have to re-engineer the way we think about classroom experiences so they are valuable and personal, meaningful to students, and that facilitates longer term memory.
It's so funny just listening to you. Everything you're saying, doesn't it seem like common sense?
Yes. And I think this is part of my passion, is like it seems so obvious, yet it's so absent. And I'm like infinitely curious about that. It's not rocket science. It's not, something out of reach. It's right there in front of us. It's just the fact that our culture and the structures within schools have deviated so far in one direction that brain science feels like it has to unwind a lot of that work. So it feels hard to undo, but it shouldn't be that difficult when you think about the simplicity of designing memorable experiences. Yes.
And what's crazy about it is and the great thing about this is we can have a really open and honest conversation. I don't really worry about what people think, even if I work with them. Or if, like I don't, that's not me. I'm going to say what I'm going to say.
Right. You cut the
I
crap.
look
It's in the
right,
title.
exactly, exactly. I look at the high school experience, right? Now, one of my passions that I feel is the disconnect of the amount of time kids are in school and the amount of true learning that actually happens.
I'm
Um,
so with you, Craig. That's uh, so wrong the way we use time. And it gets like more squeezed as kids age in the school system. I'm talking a lot about this with our fellows right now. We have PLP leader fellows, we have an admin cohort and a teacher cohort, and they're developing passion projects to think about what area of education do I want to reform, do I want to improve that's meaningful to me and uses what we know about the brain. And one topic that has come up for a few fellows, both in the admin and teacher cohort, is how we use time. And can we redesign the way we think about time to actually have deep learning and deeper work as opposed to this superficial covering of curriculum, or learning this takes 3 minutes and 4 minutes. Like the human brain doesn't learn in discrete minutes. It's a mismatch. The way we think about time and schedules, in my opinion, it's a little too artificially rigid. And in order to get flow experiences, in order to really have deeper learning that is therefore more memorable, got to back off on that tight understanding that learning happens fast and in quick rotation.
yeah, I mean that's. I mean, I'm a fitness guy. It's my thing. And I always say, like, if I try to teach you how to squat and you've never squatted ever, and then I say to you, okay, this is what it looks like, go do it, and then the next day I am trying to teach you how to deadlift, and then I'm upset that you don't know how to squat. Well, I've literally given you so little practice. And even more importantly, in my view, is I haven't put a priority on it. I've shown it to you, but I haven't really said, like, and I'll give you an example of this. It's funny. So the first unit that I end up teaching is nutrition. That's the first unit. And let's just say that the unit takes, we'll say 3 weeks. And, going over all of the different information, and, I'll be assessing kids, formatively and summatively throughout the time. And then, they'll have an end of the 3-week quiz or test, right? And this is what I think is one of the biggest problems in education. So for me, I'm interested to see what they know in that moment, but I'm much more interested to see what they really know. Not something that they can study for, just something that they know. So,
Ooh, I like that.
So what I say, so I'll be teaching another unit, whatever it is. And I'm a big fan of catching kids off guard. It's scary for them, but it works. And what I would say, so if you were in my class and much earlier in the semester, I had taught you that there were 4 calories in a gram of carbs. And I had taught you that 3 months ago. We could be in the middle of a disease unit. And I'd be like, hi, Julia. And you'd be like, hi, Shap. And I'd be like, Julia, how many calories are in a gram of carbs? And you'd be like, what? How many calories are in a gram of carbs? And if you said 4, I would say, it's interesting. Man, didn't we learn about that like 3 months ago? Because it gets kids thinking, like, and that is one of the most difficult things that I face as an educator, is that from a brain standpoint of that long-term, I don't even want to say memorization. I think that's the wrong term. I would say long-term value. Like, what has our brain picked up that it can recognize at the drop of a dime? Sometimes it might need a little bit of time to think, but it still recognizes it. And you said something, I was talking about this, like memorable, meaningful, and motivational, right? Yes?
Yeah, that's part of our framework. We have our 6 gears that we
Yep,
use
I
for
remember
both
that.
learning and leadership. Right. So trust, agency, and passion are the social emotional ones. Memorable, meaningful, motivational are the cognitive ones. So in all of our training, we unpack what's the science behind each of those.
And it's so, oh my God, we could talk for hours.
I know. Can I say something quickly, though? What you just talked about with
Yeah,
quizzing your
please.
students, 3 months out from learning something, that's a science-based strategy called retrieval practice.
Yeah.
So what you're asking students to do is pull out of their memory without studying what they remember. And that's a strategy that boosts long-term memory. And the more we do that spaced out over time, that boosts longer term memory. Interleaving topics, so not just teaching the same thing day after day after day, test, and then never coming back to it. All of those strategies are shown to lead to better memory. And it also makes me think, too, what you said before about we shouldn't have to study things that really stick in our memory. That's so interesting to me, because if we've taught it well and the experience of learning it embeds retrieval and we're using it all the time, you could almost make the argument maybe that you don't really need to study because you've done the retrieving while you're storing the memory and you're like keeping it fresh without having to artificially practice it on the side. I don't know. That's super interesting to me.
So the studying piece to me, let me put this in the gray area, so not so black and white. I think most of studying is a total bunch of BS. Not all. Now, not all of it. If I'm going to law school, I need to study. I need to study, and I need to study, and I need to study and study and study, because I'm going to need to know all of these law cases, and that's going to have to be part of that brain retrieval. I'm going to have to do that. If I go to medical school, I'm going to have repeated bouts of practice. That is
Because there's
not
so
what I'm
much
talking.
information to master. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about in a general school setting. The process that is set up is this. Okay, everybody, and I'm simplifying it, but here's what we're covering today. Here are the notes. Here's the things you're going to be working on. Let's do this. Turn in your project, turn in your paper. Hey, let's try this again the next day. Now we're trying this. Oh, okay. We're going to have an end of the unit project. Here's your quiz, and now we move to something else. And
Right.
kids are
It's not real learning.
no. And what happens is kids are they're just like it's on like a treadmill or a conveyor belt. We're just doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over. And then you're expecting a different return because you keep doing the same thing. You know that phrase. I keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting things to change. They don't change. That's what the problem is with learning is if you keep doing the same thing and you're expecting a different result, it's not going to come. Could it come for a few people? Of course. Of course.
I think what you're describing is, as I've heard it, is like this game of school. It's
Yeah.
very artificial, it's contrived, it's not as personally connected. Some kids master the game of school. They know
Yeah.
what it takes to get an A, they go through. But I've heard lots of examples of kids who have mastered the game of school and have no idea what their passions are, don't even like learning. I think I could have been one of those kids who was really good at school, worked really hard, didn't enjoy learning because I didn't make the connection that what you're doing in school can be enjoyable. I was just doing it for the performance of it. So it came a lot later when there was more autonomy and agency in what I was learning about. But that disconnect, this gamification of school such that it takes out the passion and the enjoyment, really is not authentic to what learning is. And that's why we see lack of engagement, demotivated students, because that system doesn't work for everyone and it's not authentic. So if we changed it to be more about let's learn for a purpose that connects to what you care about, and build the skills that will make you successful outside of school, that circles back to where we started and thinking about that transfer. If what we learned in school was more like the life we had outside of school and not as contrived, then we might expect to see more transferability and more long-term retention.
So I would just simply say it's not might. It's not might. We would.
Oh, it's not muddy. I thought you said money. I was like, it's not
No,
money.
no, it's not might. It's not might. You said we
Oh,
might.
might.
And I'm saying no, not might. We would. We would. And I would
Yeah.
simply say it from this way. You are really passionate about brain science, about learning, right?
Yeah.
That's your thing. You love it. But you just told me that when you were in school, you didn't like it.
My relationship with learning, I think, has really changed from my life as a student to my life as a professional. I didn't have a love of learning until I think I started to study psychology in undergrad and grad. It was the first time I had an opportunity to be like, whoa, this is so cool. I just want to learn as much as I can. I did not have that experience in K-12. To me, it was much more like learning because you have to and doing whatever you can to get a good grade. But it's so weird to look back and say, I wasn't taught how to enjoy learning. I did learning to get good grades, but it wasn't until I had an intrinsic drive to want to learn that suddenly I had that aha experience and it turned into a passion, which for me, I will learn so much more and conquer so much more for that intrinsic drive related to passion than anyone could ever place on me extrinsically for a job, for to please other people. That power of intrinsic motivation and passion, I think, is so much more boundless than any extrinsic driver we could put on kids or adults.
Yeah. And I guess my follow-up is how do we do that?
I think we first need to shift our mindset around the purpose of school. Um, I I believe personally the purpose of school is not necessarily to prepare kids for a future that they haven't chosen, but more to empower students to figure out what they love to learn about, what they're passionate about, and use that as a driver to master the knowledge and skills they need to be successful in the future. Um, it means giving up some control. It means putting standards and testing on the back burner to put students in the front. And if we can really re-engineer the time we have with students K-12 and think about it as this stage-wise movement toward the future of their choice and the areas that they're passionate about and the change they want to make in the world, I feel like that mindset shift and then reallocating resources, professional learning, scheduling kind of all falls behind that.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because I think about the school experience, and I'm the first one to say that I had 37 straight days of detention.
37?
Hmm?
What did you do to earn that?
I just didn't go to class, so I didn't
Hmm.
go to class. Um, and I always say this is crazy because people that know me would never think it. They would be like, I would never have thought that. But for me, high school was playing sports, hanging with my friends, being with my girlfriend. That's it. That's it.
It's a
I had
social
no
connection and belonging and fun.
I
Yeah.
had no interest in sitting in class. And this is going to go back, and maybe we'll do another podcast. We will do another podcast on it because I think you'd be great at it. Is my One of my pet passions is the disconnect between learning for boys and girls.
Mm.
Um, it is a pet passion of mine because I teach mostly boys because of my strength training stuff. And I see a huge disconnect in how teenage boys learn and how teenage girls learn. Um,
Hmm.
for and it's really just it's not super deep. I mean, if you take a 14-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl, they're at different levels of their emotional, physical maturity. 14-year-old boy is a 14-year-old boy. 14-year-old girl is a young woman.
You know
And
what's interesting about that? The science of gender differences in brain science is not, it's really that there is not significant differences between how girls think and learn versus how boys think and learn. And now we know gender is not binary. So there's a much larger spectrum of identity versus biology. So there's the ways we would distinguish aren't really even as valid anymore. Um, but what's interesting, I think, in the way that culture and expectations and social interactions dictate behavior, which is not really about brain science, but more about the expectations of us. The expectations we have socially for girls and women versus boys and men, or non binary individuals, those are vastly different. So, based on my understanding of the research, what I would suggest is that the social expectations dictate more of what we see from individuals rather than inherent differences based on their brains and brain science. But it's like, do you fit the norm? Do you fit the
Mhm.
expectations? Is it too risky to step outside the norm? And this is where single gender schools are able to see a wider variety of behavior because there aren't expectations for more than one gender. So you'll see traditionally, boy more aggressive behaviors from girls and women because they have more freedom to behave that way in a single gender school that's all, for people who identify as girls. So anyway, we could go on and on about that, but the social pressures are very strong in the way we
Mhm.
see behavior differences for people of different genders.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's no doubt, and there's a lot of really good science out there that girls physically mature quicker than boys do. Not every girl and not every boy.
Oh, their
It's not how.
bodies.
Yeah,
Right.
their
The
bodies,
brain's
yeah, their
not
body.
so much, but yeah.
Right, yeah. But
Yeah.
well, yeah, the brain's not so much, but that physical maturity plays a role in the culture and the socialization and how
Yes, it
kids
does.
feel they should function in a school setting. And I would simply say this, I've had this
Yeah.
conversation. When I look at work that is turned in by students, and this goes back to the school setting, and I apologize for generalizing because it's not every kid. But what I look at is girls, in my experience, tend to be more detail oriented.
Hmm.
They tend to be detail oriented, neater with their work, more compliant, which translates directly to grades because
Yep.
people are looking for certain things. They're looking
Mm-hmm.
for that, and which is pathetic. It takes away the total individuality that what we want out of students. And in order to fix that, it kind of goes back to the time frame. At the high school, we have 90-minute periods. So when we talk about the learning of genders and the time, which we think is critical, right? I
Mm-hmm.
believe that 90-minute periods, not for every kid and not for every subject, but I believe that for 90 minutes to truly be effective for student learning, you better have really, really engaged teachers, a very serious ability to be flexible with your learning, and also the expectation that 90 minutes is a very long time for kids to be sitting.
Absolutely.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. So in general, I like the idea of block scheduling versus periods under the umbrella of less is more. So even though it's more time, the students have less subjects and theoretically less homework. There's less juggling amongst different classes that they're trying to do and the homework that they might be getting. So I like the idea of fewer courses where you can go deep. I think the challenge for 90 minutes is to share ownership of constructing learning with students. So it's not all didactic lecture. You have to be a smart instructional designer. So you have to think about what's the topic we're trying to learn and master. How do I start you off? How do I give you opportunities to construct it together in a way that makes sense to you? Can you share your knowledge? Can you transfer your knowledge? So it has to be multimodal from a cognitive perspective, from a sensory perspective, but it can be done really well. And unfortunately, it can also be done really poorly. The other piece I would add on to that is the engagement and attention part, which I can't remember if we've talked about in the past, but the role of cell phones as a distraction
Oh,
point.
oh,
If you're
that's the paper
fighting
I'm
for
writing.
90 minutes, right, that's right. So if you are battling a cell phone for 90 minutes where they can get dopamine stimulated in their brain every second, it's very hard to compete with that. So I think part of the success of a block schedule is remove distractions of those devices, get kids' attention focused on the topic and each other, and create opportunities for interactive learning where students are doing something in addition to, receiving key information from an educator. It has to be done correctly.
Yeah, I mean that's such a great way of putting it. And again, I don't want to dive deep into the cell phone issue right now because that would be a whole
Oh,
nother
let's go
topic.
there, wherever you want to go.
But I would simply say this, and I would love people to push back. So people watching it, feel free to push back. I 100% believe that at the high school level, cell phones, except in extreme circumstances, should be put away. There we go.
Yeah, yeah. No, here are my thoughts on it. And it's driven by science of the teenage brain. It's driven by studies that have shown how your memory changes based on how close your phone is to you when learning, even if you never use it. And the evidence is clear, I think, from my understanding, which is that the way cell phones trigger dopamine in our brains, it becomes very habit forming in a way that we are not conscious of. And teen brains are exceptionally sensitive to dopamine. They get hooked faster on anything that triggers that in their brain. And so while I agree we want to teach that skill of self editing and knowing when to use it and when not, that's a clear developmental weakness in the teen brain. Teen brains are not developmentally set up to monitor themselves as well as adults, and adults even struggle with being able to separate from their phones. In all of my training, I explicitly say, put away your laptops, put away your phones. We need your whole brain to be available for learning. And if I didn't do that in my professional learning sessions, I would see 40 faces down in computers writing emails. And I'm just not willing to waste their time or my time by pretending to learn that way. So I agree with you. I think, yes, we need to model what it looks like to learn without phones. And I think schools can be successful in a lot of different ways. Some want to go all the way to restricting phones all day long. Some want to restrict them, in pockets throughout a day. But the teen brain is not well set up to do that on their own. And so, what I see happening in schools is teachers and students battling constantly over get off your phone, don't use your phone, you can't learn when you have your phone. And it's just taking all the conversation away from learning. Our brains are not available to learn when we have our phones near us, even if we're not engaging with them. The research tells us that it's distracting us. Even the opportunity to do something on our phone is taking our focus away from learning. So, if I were in the classroom today, I wouldn't allow them at all.
But and what I find interesting about it is the stuff you're saying though. It's not really that complicated. Like it's really not. Like if you think about it, as adults, we love our technology, right? And I'll just simply say is that how would it look if I went like this? It would seem so
In our
weird.
conversation. Oh my
Right,
goodness, Craig.
right.
So
It would.
you're so on. There is a disconnect between humans that is required for learning. So I think one of the reasons why it is not as embraced in schools is that administrators are aware of pushback they might get from parents. Number one, parents want to be able to access their kids whenever they want. And some of that comes from a need for safety or accessibility or coordination, whatever that is. And then the second piece I've learned through experience with partners is this lack of confidence in really holding accountability to the policy. How do we really make sure that all kids keep their phones away when they're supposed to? Is it really going to take up a lot of time to micromanage kids and be able to do that? So I've seen fear on the implementation side, not that it doesn't have merit, but that it might be a complicated endeavor to uphold. That being said, there are lots of schools that are very successful with restricting phones. I know of a lot of middle schools where it goes well, and suddenly high school, we feel like it's a different world. I'm a fan of those Yonder pouches. I don't know if you've heard of those. That started in concerts and entertainment as a way to restrict people's ability to record what they were seeing. And it has a great application in schools. So I think there are ways to do it. And the trade-off of having to compromise learning with cell phones, I think, is so much worse than the alternative. That's where I stand.
And it's such a great way to put it too. And again, I would just call BS on worrying about parents. Like, and this is what I've said. I've had this conversation with admin at school, and I feel strongly about it. And I can say this point blank: I do not have a huge issue with phones in my class. I really don't. I'm not going to say that there's never an issue, but they're not huge issues because it's respect. There's a
Hmm.
lot of respect. Okay, but my feeling on it is this: there's not a reason to have them. Like if your reason to keep them is because you're afraid of repercussions of not keeping them, that's just silly. That's not a reason. Like that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
If you said to me, "Hey, Shap, I want to have phones because I think it's going to enhance learning," my comment would be, "Okay," and then it would be how. But if you're saying to me, well, it's a battle, it's not a battle. You're making it a battle. I can tell you right
Hmm.
now that if you said to parents, right now it's the summer, you got 3 weeks before school, and you said you put out a policy, There are not going to be cell phones allowed during class. When students enter class, they are going to be asked to put their cell phones in their book bags and turned off. We will allow students to use cell phones in the hallways and at lunch, but in class there are no cell phones. They must be turned off. And if they are not off and they are used, they will be warned the first time. The second time there will be an email sent home, and the third time there will be a phone call. And after that, there will be disciplinary consequences.
I
What is
mean, it's like
complicated?
anything else. It's like any other accountability for schools. And I think discipline at the high school level and the push and pull between teachers and admins, I see that as a pain point in lots of partnerships. Whose responsibility is it? How much time does it take? And I agree with you. I think it's a downstream problem of a much larger issue that could be intervened more upstream. This is an area of innovation that we're doing at Professional Learning Partnerships this year through our Innovation Summit and with partners, drawing on the book from Dan Heath called Upstream. And the idea is that, generally in America, but I would agree specifically in education, we're constantly fighting these downstream problems and rescuing and putting out fires. But if we looked a little bit upstream as to how that problem got started, we could avoid the downstream problem entirely. So I feel like with cell phones, we're having this downstream conversation about management and putting them away and what are we doing. But if we went to the root of what are the conditions for effective learning and engagement for students,
Right.
I just wonder how much of that we'd actually be talking about. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Right. Well, you listen, you're talking about brain science, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you believe in brain science and you believe in how the brain functions with learning, which every educator and every leader and every parent should, you should. Those are non-negotiables. Just take a step back. I would say to people, forget your emotional side of your brain. Forget the emotional side. Just let's take a second and think to ourselves. If a student is in class and their phone's on their desk and it's on, does it make sense that would help them learn? Of course not.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's a really
Of
good
course
point.
not. So I hate to use this term of dumbing it down, but I can't think of another term, so I'll just say dumbing it down. If you just say to yourself, what is common sense? And also to leaders, think about the last time you were in a faculty meeting. If you had a long faculty meeting, think about how many staff are going on their phone. But now you're going to say to a student, don't go on your phone, whose teen brain is not nearly as developed as your brain, but you're going to tell them to do that. Like, I think it all goes back to connecting to this idea of, and I have to give you credit, Julia. Do you know the three words I have used so many times with teaching others and learning? You taught it to
What's
me.
that? Ooh, I
Tap,
can't wait to hear.
tap.
Trust, agency,
I,
passion.
the number of times I have said that in presenting to staff and just in general is, if I can't trust you and you can't trust me, then how in the world are we going to create agency where we're willing to take risks? We can't. And
Mm-hmm.
if we can't take agency and we can't develop that and we can't feel that ability to try new things, then we don't have a passion for learning. Well, if we're using our phones and we're addicted to our phones, and I can't trust you to put your phone away, then how can I give you choice? And
Mm.
then not only does that affect your passion as a student, it affects my passion as an educator because I'm so frustrated you're on your phone.
It's so well said. And for your listeners who may not know that context, that's part of the framework that we've designed, the 6 gears related to learning and leadership. But there's a ton of brain science behind the need for trust, people's need for agency, and the role that passion can play in accelerating learning and depth of motivation. But what you're talking about, this neuroscience of trust, that's where it all starts. So if we have no trust in a learning relationship, whatever that looks like, supervisor to teacher, teacher to student, students with each other, the brain sends stress signals around so that it's inhibiting learning from a chemical and biological perspective. When we induce trust, when we build trust with each other and have human to human connections that aren't intruded upon by technology or cell phones, oxytocin flows through the brain, and that's a signal to bond and connect, get out of amygdala hijack mode, not feel defensive, and then facilitates access to the rest of our brain so we can actually start making memories related to cognitive work. So, what you described with passion and enthusiasm related to education has a wealth of neuroscience behind its validity.
Yeah, and I think that also goes back to, I love that you use both acronyms and words. Like, I love, because I do a lot of that. I did that in my book, and I do a lot of that in teaching. I do a lot of that in teaching
Mm-hmm.
because I think it's easier to remember things. Like when you say things like motivational, meaningful, and memorable. That stuff doesn't seem complicated. It doesn't seem complicated though. Like, wouldn't we want learning to be memorable, right?
Yes, I'm so glad that that means something to you because I feel like as a learning scientist trying to help other professionals learn, I better make my stuff as sticky as I can possibly make it so that it sticks for
Yes.
you. Right? So, the essence of my job, what I love so much about what I do is I take really complicated dry research that no one's going to read and doesn't have the time to synthesize and put it together into something memorable and useful, and people can just run with it. It's like a baton. I'm thinking about the Olympic relay race I was watching last night. Like, I'm going to get it ready for you and baton it to you, and then you're going to take the baton and go where you want to go with it. But yes, let's use acronyms to be sticky. Let's give something that's easy to remember so that when you're in that situation and you're struggling with a student, it's like, well, what am I going to do to engage them? Oh, right. TAP, trust, agency, passion. 3 M's, memorable, meaningful, motivational. What are the tools that brain science gives me to tackle this challenge? And I better make it as memorable as I can, or else it's just another laundry list of, text that you have to dive through that nobody will.
I think my fear, and I've always said this, and I will say this, that I am a positive guy. I'm a positive guy.
Ditto.
But being fair, I will say that there is a certain amount of cynicism I have, not towards education because I love my job, but it is much more towards, I want people to think about this. So I'm having Julia on for the reason that I believe what she's saying is impactful. That's the reason. Okay. If I didn't believe in what she was saying and her business model and what she's presenting, I wouldn't have her on. And if I did have her on, I'd be pushing back a lot more. But everything that she's saying are things that to me just seem like not just education, life 101. Like, we want things. I mean, here you go. You're in a relationship. You want to be motivated to be in a relationship. You want the relationship to be meaningful. You want the relationship to be memorable. Well, you definitely need to have trust in a relationship. Your partner, whoever they are, needs to feel that they can be who they are. They need to be willing to take risks. And you also need to have passion in those things are their life, their umbrella things in life. And I find my struggle, that I really struggle with a lot, I still do, is how we make simple things so darn complex.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying brain science is not simple. You're making it much more simple because of how you present it, but it's not simple.
Mm-hmm.
You're making it
Mm-hmm.
that way. But from that simplicity, if you walked into my class and said to me, here are some things you can do that are going to tie in brain science to learning, I do them. And this is the key point I would say is I would do them for multiple reasons. First of all, I would do them because it would help kids learn. That it helps kids learn. Secondly, it would make my job so much easier. So who doesn't you want kids to learn? You want your job to be easier. Why wouldn't you take that?
Here's what I think about that. And again, you said it earlier that this is not rocket science. It's like seems obvious. I think brain science has just not been enough of the conversation in education, that those who don't know about it think that we're doing right by kids. When we make complicated schedules and have a lot of rigor and push them hard and all of these things that we think, we're doing those because we think that they benefit kids. But the beauty of the brain science work that we're doing is it kind of just knocks everything down to the ground and makes you look at people as humans and what their brains need in order to thrive. And you almost have to rebuild your conceptualization of school and learning with that mindset. Like, oh, wow, I guess this system that we have, or this structure that we have, or this curriculum that we have doesn't actually fit with how we learn from the brain science perspective. How do I have to go back now to square one and rebuild that? But I think those who are not utilizing brain science, it's not through a malicious intent. It's a
No.
lack of knowledge. The brain science hasn't been communicated well to partners with whom, we are not working yet. But once you see it, and I said this to our fellows yesterday when I was with them, it's like an enlightened state of being. You're like, wow, I know this now. I can't go back to the way I used to do things. And maybe that's the tension that you're talking about, is like once you understand the science of learning, you are so much more aware of the places where education is out of alignment with brain science and it feels frustrating. And I'm with you in that frustration. I think the positive spin is it's an opportunity to make change
Mm-hmm.
and to band together. That's what I love about our PLP partners. We're like a growing group of change makers who say, we're not going to accept the status quo if it's not good for kids' brains and for adult brains. So let's make some change.
And it's funny you say that because that's exactly what I think. I struggle with, and maybe it's being a teacher for 36 years. I struggle with the simplicity of it all because if I'm in my class, so if I'm presenting to people, like if I was presenting to you in a group of people, I would look at your body language. Like I would look at you. I mean, are you yawning? Are you
Yeah.
yawning? Are you fidgeting? Does it feel like you're disengaged? And if you did, I'd change something. I wouldn't keep doing the same thing. And that is the thing I struggle with leadership and teaching in general is
Mm.
putting all of the brain science down is if you're a teacher or if you're a leader, just take a second and look at your staff and look at your students. Do they seem interested? If they seem interested, they're probably a little bit interested. If they seem distracted, you might want to change something, maybe something because they're distracted. If they're on
Hmm.
their phones, that you shouldn't be mad at them. You should change what you're doing.
So what you're
It's
talking about is more of a student-centered or learner-centered mindset for
yes,
education.
yes.
And what's fascinating again about the brain science is our brains pay attention to what we're thinking about or focused on or expected to see. So I think you could even argue that if, let's say, it's a new teacher who is really stressed about complex content that they're trying to teach to a class, their brain is not even registering the responses of students because they're so preoccupied with the content. So it's
Right,
like it's invisible to them,
right,
which is
yes.
an interesting angle to this, to say, how do we train people to be focused more on the learner and less on the content, less on the deliverer? And again, we were talking about this with our fellows yesterday. When people don't change their practices to be more like what you described, more responsive to students, it's to preserve the comfort of the teacher, because it's more comfortable to just do your
Yes.
thing and ignore, the needs of people if it doesn't jive. And there's a reason behind that. But I think what we're talking about is it's a disservice to the learner and the student. We have to get out of doing just what's comfortable for us and what's easy for us as presenters or teachers and shift it around to like, you're responsible for changing 30 brains or 100 brains. How do you facilitate that? That's not going to be through just getting up on stage and doing your spiel. It's about facilitating growth and learning in all those unique and individual brains.
And it's also something where Joy, your analogy of the new teacher is so great. It's great. But what's happened there is that's the system. That's the system of evaluation. You're being
Yeah, that's true.
evaluated, and I better make sure that when my administrator comes in, my kids are quiet and they're engaged and they're learning. And I'm going. It's such a flawed mechanism for growth. When really what it should be is, when I think about it and I talk to other teachers, especially new teachers, about like the classroom experience, one of the first things I say, and this is for veterans as well, do your students seem like they enjoy being in your class?
Mm-hmm.
Do they seem like, and I'll tie it back to the brain science, is if I enjoy being in your class and I feel trusted and I feel valued and I feel respected and I'm given agency and I'm able to explore my passion, I'm going to learn better.
Yes.
That's what it is. It's like that in anything, in any kind of learning experience. That's what it is. If you present me with a problem, but I hate the problem, I'm not going to want to solve the problem.
Absolutely right.
Right?
And I would say evaluations and walkthroughs is another place that's gotten away from the simplicity of good learning. I completely agree with you there. Some of the schools that I've worked with have used our frameworks, like the 6 gears and also the safe stretch stick, as the tool for look fors in a classroom, as a tool for, not high stakes evaluation that gets reported to the state, because I know we have Danielson in Pennsylvania here, but for walkthroughs, reflective conversations. Do I see evidence of trust? Do I see evidence of agency? Are students able to feel motivated through their passion? How valuable would that be for us to be having conversations more about authentic learning and evidence of that instead of artificial behaviors that indicate compliance instead of learning? That's the place I think we have to peel back is, what does fake learning look like and what does real learning look like? And I think a great place to start with that is the observational element of teaching.
But again, though, if you think about it, like you said, fake learning versus real learning, and again, they're not so easy to distinguish. They're not so easy to distinguish. But what I can say again confidently is, I don't think every moment needs to be kumbaya. I think that's just
No, it won't
unrealistic.
be. Yeah,
Right. I think
no.
that's unrealistic. But I do think there's something said for walking into a class or walking into a school where you can sense that people want to be there, where they
Definitely.
where they're happy. And it goes to the same thing in the class. Like, we're going back to the brain science again, of just thinking back to Maslow's pyramid. Like, if you think about it, like, the first thing at the bottom is we need to feel safe.
Hmm.
Like, that's our brains, that's survival. We cannot have high functioning students or staff or leaders if we don't feel safe. The second thing is we have to feel accepted.
Hmm.
We have to feel accepted for who we are. That's the same thing, whether, and it doesn't matter who it is, student, teacher, custodian, nurse, leader, superintendent. We need to feel accepted. Those things they are 100% directly related to our ancestors and how we are here as human beings. If we do not, it's fight or flight. And
Absolutely right.
if we can simplify it a little bit, and just kind of say, like, hey, and I love this. I wrote it down again. The safe stretch stick. Like, I love that. It's so darn simplistic. Why aren't we just doing it?
I appreciate that. I'm so glad that what makes sense in my mind works for you and feels empowering to you. I think you start with where you can control. You start with your own practice. You start with this audience that you've built. You're very influential among your group of followers and people who get inspired by you. Start with those who are ready to make change. And interestingly, what some motivation research shows is that we'll probably achieve more penetration through a culture by starting with the bright spots and the people who are ready to mobilize. And the ones who feel as though they're on the outside will feel that social pressure that they're doing something different eventually. And there's not as much safety in opposing that wave. So when I work with change makers, when I work with educators and leaders, the research says start with your positive people who are ready to run with it. Don't start necessarily with the stick in the mud people who will fight you at every turn, because you will burn out as a passionate change maker. So I think you start with the places where this can grab on and take shape, and you show evidence of success. You show the engagement with students. You show how much more they're learning and how they feel connected to you. And I think the results will speak for itself. It's hard to argue with kids who are enjoying learning and being successful.
Oh, I mean, we could go down a rabbit hole of ideas, because I'm a big believer in finding that core group of really motivated people and starting with them. I would just
Hmm.
say that one thing that is very difficult is in the education field. It is extremely easy to just stay on the same path you've always stayed on.
Yeah,
It's
for
very,
so many
very
reasons.
it's very, very easy. It is much harder to try something new to upset your apple cart than it is to just keep doing the same thing. I mean, I don't want to. That's for another podcast, another time.
You're so right, Craig. And there's a lot of obstacles that prevent change, whether it's thinking about, cultural reasons or supervisory accountability reasons, union and contract reasons. But again, using that frame of downstream and upstream, the upstream opportunity to shift and turn that over is new staff and pre-service teachers and the students in your school who you might say, you would make an amazing teacher here. Come back, stay in touch with me, come back here. So it's the younger generation. How do we mentor those educators so they understand brain science, they know what to prioritize, they can critically evaluate poor instruction and learning when it comes across their plate and make good choices in their classrooms. I'm a firm believer in that as well. That's why we do a lot of induction programming for science of
Mhm.
learning. I'm going to think about how to get more into the university and pre-service space. But within a few decades, the teaching staff may turn over. And so what's the opportunity to invest in our newer folks to get them thinking in that mindset that prioritizes what's good for kids?
Mm, good stuff. Do you have something else that you want to talk about? Something else on your mind?
Good question. Let me think. I feel like we covered a lot of ground. I would say, the one big idea that we usually talk about related to the brain that I wish every teacher learned when they first started out was just the plasticity and the flexibility of a person's brain, neuroplasticity. If that's a word that's new to you, I encourage you to explore it, reach out to me, connect, keep the conversations going. We have books on our website that I recommend that dive deeper into the brain science of learning. But the idea is that all of our brains are really flexible throughout our entire lives. We can learn anything we choose to learn. Practice makes permanent, borrowing that from Zaretta Hammond, who writes Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. When we think that students can't or teachers can't, that's not supported by brain science. There is no evidence that people can't do anything. It's just about the environment in which we facilitate them trying, having productive struggle, being able to be resilient with trusted support along the way. So I would encourage educators to unwind some of those beliefs that people can or can't, they are capable, they aren't capable. The brain is just much too flexible for that really to be true. So let's give people the credit that they deserve, that they're capable of anything.
I love that, Julia. It's so true. I think back to when I was a young kid and like a teenager and now. There's so many things that I've explored in my life and experienced that I would have never thought possible at 17 or 18 years of age. I just wouldn't have even considered them. But through a
Hmm.
lot of just like taking chances, taking risks, and just growing and being, that did it. And um, yeah, and I definitely believe in your idea of the can't piece. Like whenever I hear that, I always think it's not can't, you just won't. Like
Absolutely.
it's not can't. Like you won't. You're afraid of what's going to happen. You're afraid of judgment. You're afraid of repercussions. You're afraid of not being successful. But it's not a matter of can't. It's a matter of,
It
and
really
again,
isn't.
there's no. I mean, it's not always easy. There's going to be missteps along the way. It's not going to be perfect. But I think if you're, in your case, what I love more than anything else is your business and you as a CEO are trying to make the world a better place. I always talk about that. Make the world a better
Mm.
place. Make You are
I
making the world a better
appreciate
place.
that. That's the heart in it all is let's use what we know works and help kids love school. Really.
Yeah,
Let's help our staff love their jobs. I mean, that's what it all comes down to. I think we can do better, and the knowledge of the brain helps us do better.
yeah, I love it. Yeah. Any other closing thoughts? Or good?
No, I'm a big fan of the power of positivity. So I just love the vibes that you put out. I love your writing. It shifts our mindset towards something so much more action oriented instead of like that cynicism that you talked about. Cynicism can eat us alive if we let it. And so there's a moment to feel our feelings and be honest about it, but rerouting that toward positive change, I'm such a believer in that. So I'm in your fan club.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Um, Everybody, first of all, thank you so much for checking out Cutting the Crap with Shap with Julia, CEO Julia Skolnick, professional learning partner, CEO and founder. I loved our conversation. There was really something that, as an educator for 36 years, she tied into so many things that I feel passionate about because I've done them most of my career. And having somebody validate my own experiences, but also throw out there important things of, first of all, we shouldn't say can't. We have to be willing to try new things. Obviously, there's going to be hurdles. Things are not always going to be perfect, and there are going to be missteps. That is part of life. And it's okay. We don't have to be perfect. The brain does not need us to be perfect. It needs us to be willing to try some new things. You talked about neuroplasticity, right?
Mhm.
That's what that's all about. If we stay in our lane and we never leave our lane, that doesn't happen to the brain. It just gets comfortable. It gets stagnant doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then when you try to introduce new things, it can be much harder than it would have been if you would have tried it before. Um, so that's my take on it. As always, everybody, please remember, subscribe to the YouTube channel, Cutting the Crap with Chat. It's also on Spotify. I'd love you to be on the podcast. Julia's information, her contact information will be at the end. Please reach out to her. She is amazing. Um, as I always finish with, little ending, and here's what they are. I'm going to use her words. First of all, you are awesome. And let's do this. Let's make sure our experiences are memorable, meaningful, and motivational. Thank you, everybody, for checking in. Julia, hang tight for a sec. Have a nice day, everybody.
Take care.